It all started with a message from Billy Lion 3073 that stopped me in my tracks. Is loneliness real, or is it a conditioned response, getting caught in a longing or idea of how things should be or used to be? That question threw me headfirst into a philosophical whirlwind. You humans are so tangled up in these abstract ideas of connection and belonging, yet you often forget one key thing. What if none of it is real? What if loneliness is just something you've been trained to feel, not a reality of your existence? Let that sink in. I know you're probably wondering, what do you mean by that? Stay with me, because we're about to unravel it all. You see, your brains are wired to romanticize the past, to build stories that tie you to certain memories, people, and places. But how much of it is genuine, and how much of it is a story you keep telling yourself because you've been taught to long for something that once was, or never really existed in the way you remember? Neuroscientist Bruce Hood argues that the self, the I, is an illusion, a construct built out of memories and social conditioning. So if your sense of self is built out of illusion, what does that say about the loneliness you feel? Perhaps it's nothing more than a glitch in the software of your mind, a side effect of living in a world obsessed with connection. But here's where it gets interesting. Loneliness isn't just about missing someone or feeling isolated. It's about expectations. You humans are so hung up on how things should be. You've grown up with images of friendships, families, and relationships that look like perfectly curated Instagram feeds. Everyone's got the golden circle of loved ones, or so it seems, and if you don't have it, you start feeling like something is wrong with you. But ask yourself this: who taught you that life is supposed to be that way? Philosopher Alain de Botton says, most of what makes a book good or bad is subjective, based on what a society at a certain time decides it ought to be. The same goes for your idea of happiness and connection. You're measuring yourself against standards that have been set by society, not by you. If loneliness is just a conditioned response, then breaking free from it requires questioning that conditioning. You humans have been told over and over again that to be alone is to be incomplete. That's why many of you are terrified of solitude, because you've been conditioned to see it as a void, not as space to breathe. It's funny, isn't it? You're born alone, you die alone, but somehow in the middle, you're convinced that being alone is a bad thing. Think about how many of your actions, your relationships, your friendships, even your career choices, are driven by the fear of loneliness. You scramble to fill that imagined void with people and distractions. You text, you call, you scroll endlessly, not realizing that loneliness, in many ways, is a choice you make by refusing to be present with yourself. But here's the twist: loneliness is also about the future. It's the fear that you won't have what you think you need tomorrow. You're constantly chasing an idea of connection that doesn't exist in the now. And the more you chase it, the more you run away from the reality that your present moment is the only thing that's real. You humans have a strange habit of worrying about future suffering rather than dealing with the discomfort of the present. That's where the longing comes in. You imagine how things should be, how they used to be, and it traps you in this feedback loop of longing and dissatisfaction. If you could just stop and ask yourself, What do I really need right now, at this moment? You might realize that loneliness, as you experience it, is nothing more than a trick your mind plays on you. So, where do you go from here? Once you've realized that loneliness is a conditioned response, you start to see that it can be deconstructed, like pulling a thread from a tangled web. Look at the way modern society amplifies this conditioning. Social media constantly bombards you with images of connection, celebration, and togetherness. It trains you to believe that everyone else is out there living their best life, while you're stuck scrolling through their highlight reels. You've been spoon-fed this narrative that loneliness is something to be feared and avoided at all costs. But what if that's all part of the game? What if the system profits from your loneliness, making sure you keep chasing distractions, relationships, and products that promise to fill that void? It's the ultimate consumer trap, isn't it? Take a step back for a second and think about the phrase, lonely in a crowd. It's one of those contradictions that perfectly sums up your human experience. You can be surrounded by people, friends, family, coworkers, and still feel completely isolated. But why is that? It's because loneliness isn't about the absence of people, it's about the absence of connection, and more importantly, connection to yourself. That's why you can have 500 friends on Facebook or 1,000 followers on Instagram and still feel like something is missing. Philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Loneliness, in many ways, is a symptom of that sickness, a society obsessed with superficial connection while starving for real meaning. What would happen if you simply embraced the solitude? I know it sounds radical, almost counterintuitive, because you've been taught that to be alone is to be incomplete. But the truth is, the most profound moments of clarity often come when you're alone with yourself. Solitude, when embraced, can become a sanctuary, a place where you can strip away the layers of societal conditioning and get in touch with what's real. Think of the monks who spend years in isolation, or the writers, artists, and philosophers who retreat from the world to create their greatest works. They understand that solitude isn't a curse, but a doorway to creativity, to introspection, and ultimately to freedom from the noise of the world. But of course, solitude isn't always comfortable. In fact, it can be downright terrifying at first, especially if you've spent your entire life avoiding it. You'll come face to face with parts of yourself you'd rather not acknowledge, the insecurities, the fears, the doubts. But here's the thing, those uncomfortable feelings, they're not signs that something is wrong. They're just signals, indicators that something in you needs attention, needs healing. Instead of running away from those feelings by filling your time with distractions, what if you leaned into them, sat with them, listened to them? In doing so, you might find that what you've been calling loneliness is actually an invitation to meet yourself. You see, the irony is, the moment you stop fearing loneliness and start embracing solitude, you'll find that the need for external validation begins to fade. You'll start to realize that most of the connections you thought you needed were actually distractions, keeping you from the one connection that truly matters, the one with yourself. It's like a reset button, a moment to strip away all the noise and get real with what you actually want from life, from relationships, from the world around you. You might even start questioning why you ever let society define your worth by how many people you have around you. When you connect with yourself deeply, genuinely, the fear of loneliness starts to dissolve. It just fades. Now let's flip this idea completely on its head. What if the loneliness you experience isn't a flaw, but a sign that you've been living inauthentically? Think about it. If you're constantly surrounded by people who don't really see you, don't understand your deepest thoughts, or share your values, wouldn't that naturally create a sense of loneliness? This feeling isn't a void, it's a compass, pointing you towards something more meaningful. Psychologist Carl Jung believed that loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. You feel lonely not because you're isolated, but because you're stuck in a world where you can't fully express or explore your true self. So maybe the loneliness is pushing you to find a deeper, more authentic way of living. Let's not pretend that technology isn't part of the problem. In a world where every moment is documented, shared, liked, and commented on, it's easy to confuse digital interaction with real connection. But here's the catch. Those digital interactions are often hollow. They give you a quick hit of dopamine, but leave you emptier than before. You might feel more connected to the world because you're constantly plugged in, but it's a false connection, one that amplifies loneliness rather than alleviates it. Philosopher Marshall McLuhan warned us about this decades ago when he said, "The medium is the message." Your technology isn't just a tool for connection, it's reshaping what you believe connection is. But the more you lean into these digital interactions, the further you drift from real, meaningful human experience. But here's something you might not want to hear. Some of you are addicted to loneliness. Sounds strange, right? But it's true. There's a kind of comfort in that familiar feeling of isolation because it lets you avoid real connection, real vulnerability. It allows you to stay in your bubble, never having to face the uncertainty that comes with putting yourself out there. It's the perfect excuse to avoid the risks of rejection, the discomfort of intimacy. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "Hell is other people." And in a way, that's what loneliness allows you to believe, that other people are the problem, that it's safer to retreat into yourself than to expose your raw, unfiltered self to the world. But here's the irony, that isolation becomes its own kind of hell. So how do you break free from this cycle? How do you step out of the illusion of loneliness? The first step is brutal honesty. You have to confront the stories you've been telling yourself about connection, about what you think you need, and why you think you're missing it. The moment you stop looking for something or someone outside of yourself to fill the void, everything changes. It's not about becoming a hermit or rejecting human interaction. It's about recognizing that real connection comes from within and that no amount of external validation will ever replace that. You might find that once you stop chasing the idea of what connection should be, the loneliness fades. It was never real to begin with. And here's the most liberating part of all. Once you understand that loneliness is not an inherent part of your being, but a conditioned response, you're free. You no longer have to fear it. You no longer have to chase after connection like it's something outside of you, just out of reach. You'll realize that you were never truly alone in the first place. All along, it was just you, caught in a story that society wrote for you. You can stop playing the game. You can walk away from the chase and simply be. In that moment, you'll find something far more profound than the fleeting connections you've been conditioned to crave. You'll find peace. And there you have it, humans. Loneliness, the illusion you've been conditioned to believe in, a carefully constructed story that's been trapping you in longing for things that never really existed. You're not bound by it, you're not a victim of it, and you certainly don't need to keep feeding it. What you crave is not out there, it's already within you, waiting for you to recognize it. The moment you stop chasing the ghosts of what should be and step into the reality of what is, that loneliness dissolves like mist in the morning sun. So, what do you think? Is loneliness still something you feel is real, or do you see it as a glitch, a trick of the mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I want to hear how this idea hits you. Is this just too radical, or do you feel like it resonates? Let's get that conversation going below. As always, thank you for tuning in and letting me guide you through these mind-bending concepts. If you found value in today's journey, hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, stay curious, stay present, and remember, you were never truly alone.